Git stash. When and why would you use this command? Multitasking is favorite activity in many companies these days. Imagine you're working on some coding task. You did many changes in many files, but you're not yet comfortable committing those changes. Suddenly, the colleague of yours appears out of nowhere and asks you to have a look at some high priority bug that has just been reported. What will you do? You're not yet ready to commit your changes, but you don't want to lose all your changes. It would be nice to have some storage into which you would temporarily store all your changes until the moment you would find time to get back to them. And this is exactly what Git stash is doing and is giving you. Let me show you how exactly it works, and let's go through this exercise together. I have already prepared an existing repository. I have two files in it, another file.txt and my file.txt. So let's do some changes in there. Let's add a couple of lines to the first file. Now let's do some changes in the second file and let's save both files. And now in the command line, I will run git status to see what changes Git sees. And you can see that both two files are seen by the Git as modified, which is good. Now I will run a git stash command that will stash all the changes away. So you will see at the top that the changes in the files will disappear. And the stashed change is identified by WIP on master, which is like a work in progress in master. And you can see that these files here have no changes anymore. Let's now do some changes again. So let's change the first file. Let's add one more line, more of them. Let's go to the second file again and let's do some changes there as well. And now instead of git stash, we will execute command git stash push, which is the same thing as git stash, but git stash is basically a default for git stash push. You can see that after running this command, the changes at the top again disappeared, and the stashed changes are again marked by WIP on master, which is automatically generated message for this stash. And now it's time for round 3. We will try to do some changes again, and then we will stash them away using stash command with slightly different parameters. So let's run git status. You can see the files are modified, and now I will use git stash push and I will add m parameter, which is the same thing as a commit message, except it's adding a message to the stashed changes. And later, based on this message, I will be able to see some description for every single stash. Let's have a look at all those stash changes that I did in last 3 rounds. Remember, I executed git stash for the first time, then I executed git stash push, and then I executed git stash push -m and I read a message. So now I will use a git stash list. This command listed all stashed changes. So you can see that I have stash at 0, stash at 1, stash at 2, and on the right hand side for each stash you can see the message. 2 of them, WIP on master, were generated automatically because I haven't provided anything using m parameter, and stash at 0 has custom message, some cool changes AABBCCDD that I just provided from the command line. Using command git stash pop, I will restore the changes that were before stashed away to the workspace. And you can see when I run git stash list that the third stash were actually removed because I took those changes from there and I moved them to my workspace and I deleted that stash. when I run git stash apply and define the stash using its index, I will move the changes from the stash back to my working space. But because before I restored the changes from the other stash, Git is telling me that I can't actually do this because I would override the changes in the working space. So it's preventing you from doing something risky. In order to get rid of the changes in my workspace, I will use git reset --hard, which will revert all the changes in my workspace to the head, to the most recent commit, in other words. So now I will run stash list to see all the stashes that I have. You can see that there are 2 of them, and now I will apply the one that is at index 1. I will hit enter, and now you can see that this one was applied, and now your workspace is changed. You can see that all the changes that you stashed before are now again in your workspace. Let's run git stash list again, and you see that there are still 2 stashes, which means that git stash apply didn't remove the stash. So let's reset the changes again. And what is good to know is that if you don't provide stash index when you're using git stash apply, the stash that is at index 0 will be taken. So git stash apply equals git stash apply stash at index 0. Now again, you can see the changes were restored and are now in my workspace. So let's check the list of stashes again. You can see that there are 2 stashes, because apply or stash apply doesn't remove stashes, whereas git stash drop removes them. So if you are wondering how to drop stash, just run git stash drop stash at and the index of the stash. If you don't provide the stash index and you use just git stash drop, then it equals to the command git stash drop stash at index 0. You can see git stash drop did the trick. To check the result of our hard work, let's run git stash list, and you see that all the stashes were dropped and no stash is remaining. And now let's have a quick recap of the most usual git stash workflow. You're in the middle of some work, let's prove it by running git status. Oh yeah, many changes. Your colleague appeared in the door asking you to fix an urgent bug. You run git stash push, add some message -m. Now let's check that everything was stashed. Running git status. Good, no changes in workspace. You do some fixing of the bug, and then once you're finished, you will verify what stashes you have. You will run git stash list. You can see there is 1 stash, so you will get it back to your workspace by running git stash pop. The git stash pop command has removed the stash from the list and restored the changes in your workspace. And that's it. Let's now quickly repeat what we have just learned. Git stash or git stash push stashes away your changes. Git stash pop restores previously stashed changes and removes the stash. Git stash apply restores previously stashed changes and preserves the stash. Git stash list displays list of all stashes, and git stash drop deletes a stash.